Hello everyone, this is Warpster77 tuning into another video, and today I will be reading off to you guys Chapter 5 of Phantom Peaks, Beat Down. Warpster and the others gathered together on the sidewalk in the busy town to talk about what they needed next. "We need weapons," Viper said, and Side agreed. "I think we need more information and gear," Shadow added in. Kick stepped forward and said, "Honestly, we didn't know where the action is at." Warpster had come up to a conclusion.
"This is how we'll go about things. Side of Viper, go find a weapons shop. Shadow and Kick, you two try and find an archive or something we can study up on what we'll be facing soon enough."
Shadow turned to Warpster and asked, "What about you?" Warpster smiled and replied,
"I'm gonna go do what I do best. Listen for intel."
"I get it. You want us to go do the dirty work while you dink around on the streets," Kick proclaimed as he pointed to Warpster.
"Do you have any better ideas? You do what you wish, but we'll all meet back here in 2 hours.
Warpster said as he went north, down the busy, bustling road. Viper and Side crossed the street and went west. Kick shrugged and looked to Shadow. "Looks like it's just you and me, little buddy." Shadow nodded and began to walk the opposite direction of Warpster. Walking down the snowy street, Warpster dug his hands into his pockets and kept the brim of his hat over his eyes so he could only see the passing people's knees. The cold air didn't seem as bad now that he was fully clothed and not in a very thin long johns. Slowly creeping down the streets, he didn't hear or see anything particularly exciting until a hand rested on his shoulder. "I said, how much do you want for the sword?" the familiar voice said from the man in the store from behind him. Whirling around, Warpster was met with the faces of both the men from the store. One was wild-looking and had 2-day stubbles on his chin. The other was well-built and had his face with chiseled features. Warpster kept his eyes low and the brim of his hat over his face for the most part, and said in a low, grumbly tone,
"I said it was not for sale."
"Why not? A greenie like you wouldn't even know how to use a thing like that."
"Wanna bet? I'll take you and your buddy on hand-to-hand."
The two scoffed and then smiled. "Follow us. Then to the stylish FFC training hall. We'll duke it out there." Warpster raised an eyebrow to them and then held up a hand.
"And if I win, I want you both to tell me everything about these factions. Everything from who runs them, to where they are located, to how they react to one another."
"Are you sure you don't want to just speak to our boss, then?" the gangly one asked.
"Then it's a deal. You defeat me and I'll give you my sword. But if I win, you take me to your leader."
The two looked at each other and then shrugged. "Let's get going, then." Walking across the street, the men walked Warpster inside the faculty and noticed green banners with a stylish logo on minimal lines spelling out the letters faculty. Then, the bold letters FFC were imprinted underneath it.
"What is FFC?"
Warpster asked them as they passed the banner. "We're the FFC, the best Stylus has to offer. We are the front fighting corps," the well-built man said as they entered a corridor where rooms lined the walls. Each door had a window where you could look through and see the occupants fighting, with a variety of weapons, combat styles, and even just exercising competitions.
"But what is your motive or purpose?"
Warpster asked as they came into a vacant room. "What do you mean, purpose? This is just a job, and the higher you go, the more you get paid," the gangly man responded. Warpster's eyes narrowed.
"I see. Just mere mercenaries. I've dealt with your kind before. I need no further explanation to your heinous motives,"
Warpster said as he entered the room. Taking offense to his comment, the well-built man withdrew his long knife.
Are you ready to eat those words? Because we've been training to fight, not just in a pathetic game.
We are the United States Marines, and we put punks like you to bed.
Shouldn't you be stopping terrorists instead of perhaps occupying another country? That has no relation to us, then.
Warpster shot back at them as he stood firm and didn't even turn to face them. When the door closed, Warpster got a message on his HUD that alerted him they were no longer in a safe zone, and he would receive damage normally. Turning on heel, Warpster faced the two men, who held knives in their hands, but noticed the one in the well-built man's hand was nearly as long as a sword.
I thought you weren't using swords,
Warpster asked. The built man laughed. The legal size for a custom knife and maximum size is 12 inches. It gives me leverage, he said as he began to circle Warpster, looking for an opening even though Warpster stood relaxed and loose in stance. Both men were trying to surround him, slowly, and Warpster only watched in hidden amusement.
Take your time. I have all day,
Warpster said, tipping his hat brim low to cover his eyes. Cocky little guy, aren't ya? The gangly man said. Warpster turned to face him and replied,
I stand above you, so I wouldn't refer to me as little.
When his back was turned, the well-built man rushed forward and slashed at Warpster's back. Using his skitter shoes to launch high into the air, Warpster spun around in midair and came crashing down onto the man, wrapping his legs around the knife-wielding arm. Using all his weight to tip the man off balance, Warpster then kicked his jaw to stun him. Rolling to his feet, Warpster saw the gangly man rushing forward and jutting the knife at his face. Warpster deflected the attack with his left arm and pushed himself to the other side using his right arm to land a blow right into his temple of the attacker's head. Then, using his long legs, he tripped the man down to the floor. The well-built man was back on his feet and rushing after Warpster. Waiting for the right moment, Warpster flung himself down onto the floor at the man, who swung hard into his chest. Warpster used his skitter shoes to boost the man off his feet and go sailing across the room while Warpster launched into the other combatant, who was still recovering from the sudden loss in hearing. Swiftly laying a heel to the back of his skull, Warpster knocked the gangly man clean out. Getting back to his feet, the well-built man was charging Warpster. This time, Warpster made the first move and boosted up into the air and shot down at him with several zigzagging boosts. Eventually, appearing right in front of the man, Warpster laid lightning blows and dodged heavy counter ones. Grappling the man's arm, Warpster pulled himself close and landed an open palm strike on his throat. Shock filled his eyes as his mouth gaped open, requesting air to fill his lungs. Warpster then kicked the man's knees out and heard the bones snap as he fell down to the floor. Hearing something being pulled from a holster, Warpster unsheathed his sword and turned around on heel to see the gangly man taking aim with a pistol at Warpster. Firing off the pistol, he thought he had won, but was surprised when Warpster was still standing even after the point-blank shot. Firing rapidly, the man emptied his 10-round magazine, but Warpster stood standing. "What the hell?" he exclaimed as Warpster withdrew his own T1S5 Colt pistol.
I can block bullets with my sword,
Warpster replied as he fired a round into his skull and killed the man. Warpster heard a door open and looked over to see a man in full uniform, accompanied by 3 other men who looked like professional soldiers in combat armor at all. "What the hell is going on here, and who the hell are you?" the well-uniformed man asked. He had gray stripes in his hair along the tops of his buzz-cut hair and high cheekbones. He also had a strong jawline, lively and attentive blue eyes, and a sneering nose. His posture was perfect, and his stance was that of a man run through the military all his life.
I won a bet, and now you will cover the expenses.
"And who the hell is gonna make me?" the man shouted excessively loud.
Are you the leader of this outfit of poor soldiers you call elites?
Warpster said, revealing the 2 bleeding men behind him. "You mean the rookies? Unfortunately, yes I am. I'm Colonel Wallace Hand, but you can call me Colonel. Now, who might I address you as?" Warpster took a stance and then said,
I'm Warpster77. Now, I need to know some things about the factions in this place. What are the Triple A's?
The colonel shook his head. Why should I tell you anything?
Because we're in a danger zone, and I can make easy work out of any troop you could throw at me.
With a grin, the colonel replied, Could you take on my boys here? They're Navy SEALs, and are trained over 8 months in this contraption. Is that right? The 3 men saluted and replied instinctively in unison, Sir, yes, sir! Of course, the colonel replied as he strode over towards Warpster. So unless you think you can take on 3 Navy SEALs, I think you'd best be leaving. Warpster didn't move a muscle. Stepping back, the colonel laughed and stood back at the 3 men were geared with small firearms, knives, and grenades even. Warpster saw some guns that looked like automatics, and he would need to get in close and fast if he wanted to get out of this alive. There was no cover in the room, so he'd use their bodies as shields to take them out one at a time. When the door clicked, the alert went up, and once again, as he set the Marines off and blocked the bullets aimed towards his path, as he caught a point to where the target was closest. When the door clicked, the alert went up once again and sent the Marines off to draw their sidearms at their hips. Warpster boosted left with the sword in hand and blocked the bullets aimed towards his path and caught a point to where the target he was closest to and sliced at his arm. The man lunged back his pistol-wielding arm, and Warpster took that chance to fire his own pistol and shoot at the middle Marine who was still firing. Hitting him multiple times in the upper chest, the .45 rounds pierced through his Kev Mark I armor chest plate like butter and sent him falling to the ground. The first soldier reeled back as Warpster advanced upon him and boosted right into his abdomen and thrusted his blade deep inside him. The third soldier had a clear shot and fired at Warpster. The bullet pierced his side and hit Warpster in the right lung. Breathing heavy, with blood filling his lung, Warpster pushed the impaled man into the coming stream of bullets. Feeling the burning pain in his side, Warpster pushed the man forward as the last man standing evaded the body. Warpster was left standing face to face with the Marine aiming down the sights of his gun. Breathing raspily, Warpster waited for him to fire and then struck the bullet aside like lightning. The Marine was backing up as fast as Warpster was approaching. Eventually, he had his back to the wall and his magazine was emptied. Keeping his cool, the Marine pulled out his knife and held it at the ready as Warpster trudged towards him. Pulling back his arm, Warpster ready to strike him down with the advantage of range on his side. The Marine ducked the swing and then rushed forward under Warpster's arm. Warpster boosted backwards and avoided the blow and put a couple feet in between him and the still charging Marine. Seeing his momentum was now the Marine's disadvantage, Warpster charged his sword into a glowing white beam. Swinging it straight down at the Marine, the soldier tried to block the sword with his blade, but was completely speechless as the sword blade phased clean through the knife and cleaved his head in half. Catching his breath, Warpster swiped the air with the blade and sent the blood flinging off the pearly white blade onto the floor, leaving it shining and spotless. The colonel came back into the room confused and slightly scared at the boy he saw standing before him. "You're one of those kids, huh?" Pointing the blade at the colonel's throat, Warpster huffed a raspy breath.
"Now, start talking."
Handing Warpster a medical device called biotic filler, the colonel took in a deep breath and asked, "What do you want to know?" Injecting the solution into the wound, Warpster could breathe again and his throat cleared.
"I want to know about the factions."
The colonel looked at him, puzzled. "Who are you to not know what the factions are is really puzzling."
"Why is that?"
Warpster asked, curious to know what was so important about these factions. "Because you need to be in one before you can even come to this place. No one can just come up here and log on like a normal computer. You need to be in the military before anyone is even allowed on here. And even then it's only specified to special divisions. Even then, I guess that makes you a freelancer."
"Explain,"
Warpster ordered. The colonel took in a deep breath and said, "Freelancers are people who don't serve a faction, are increasingly rare as the days go by. The most of Stylus is comprised of from California, British, and Australian armies. Archangel Arms, or aka AAAs, has basically mostly comprised of Eastern America, French, and Asian armies. The Sebastian Inc. is only comprised of Northern European and Russian troops. Then there are two more major companies that comprise of a fixture named C&G Enterprises and Mockingball Firms.
So I see. So tell me, which side is the most powerful in influence?
The colonel scoffed at first, but then looked off and thought. As of right now, Stylus and Archangels are locked in a dead even match. But their secret weapon is almost completely impervious to our frontal assaults. Any attempt we take on its life, we fail time and time again. No one from Stylus or outside resources has ever gotten intel on it and has returned alive to tell the tale in full detail.
What is the secret weapon?
A person that goes by the name Red 6, an unstoppable monster that is completely silent and has yet to even show himself to the public. It is only rumors and hearsay, but we have come to recognize its existence.
What are its traits?
You asked about the factions, not Red 6.
Then what faction does it work for?
Like I said, it's Archangel's secret weapon. They send it on high-priority events and scavenging missions, nothing else. It doesn't compete in the public arenas, nor does it show up to the biannual Phantom Forces competition.
What is this competition?
Again, you only asked about the factions. Aggravated, Warpster pointed the tip of the sword closer to his throat.
Fine. Then tell me, what is the importance do the other three hold?
C&G Enterprises holds a large economy in the Asian fronts and other districts, and Sebastian Inc. makes some of the cheaper, rugged weapons that is not suitable for my Marines. That's why we stick with Stylus. Here we have elite equipment and elite soldiers.
So essentially Sebastian has a larger base in number due to the units, and not the fact that they can afford them.
Yes, but that doesn't make them better. The only reason they won the previous two competitions is because of that woman named Golden. Warpster raised an eyebrow at the mention of Goldie's name, but figured he wouldn't get an answer out of him if he asked, so he just remembered she was in Sebastian Inc.
Now, one last question. What is the point of these factions, and who runs them?
Simple. Economy. I'm no expert in that field, but I know enough that this world works with a base in value generated by the mobs to hunt, and then the events to cash them all in. All come to the center of Spectre Inc. From there, we purchase repairs, equipment, billing rights, territory, clothing, and all other forms of things to keep us going, which cycles back to them. The people with profit can use it in the real world, which will cycle back to their countries as well and make it then cash back into the game. It's rather remarkable. All for who runs them. The leaders of Stylus are Leto, Zinneman, and Shaylan. The Chicago governor, Sebastian Fredericks, runs Sebastian Inc. CG Enterprises is hosted by a series of Asian politicals and congregate mostly in Tokyo, Japan. The Mockingball Firms is run by the German Prime Minister and has a successful market on a share of things.
What about Archangels?
No one really knows. It's only representatives who come to show themselves. Never in the head, who just goes by the letters TLA. Warpster thought about that for a moment, and then started to process all this information.
Thank you for everything,
Warpster said as he put the sword away and began to walk out of the room. Wait! Before you go, I have one question for you. Turning, Warpster met eyes with the colonel and nodded. You're one of those kids, aren't you? From the Crossfire competition from so long ago.
Yes. How did you know that?
Warpster asked, puzzled. Because my son was in that thing, and he left about 2 years ago and never came back. His name was Wilster Hand. I miss him, and I can never find any one of those kids who would tell me about him.
Wilster, you say? I fought beside a blond boy named Wilster, and I vaguely recall him having a little brother.
That's him! The colonel was ecstatic, and his eyes flared.
As far as I know, he is dead. But that's why I'm here, to truly see if the ghosts are gone.
The colonel looked in Warpster's eyes and put a hand on his shoulder.
Then, son, do me a favor.
If you ever find the slightest sign of him, tell him I'm here and waiting.
Roger. Thank you, Colonel. And let me add you here to keep in touch.
Warpster said as he pulled out his BT. The colonel gladly accepted and said in return, "If you ever needs some help from Stylus, I have high ranks, and I can get you anything from support to weapons. Just you have your friends here, Mr. Warpster?" Smiling, Warpster turned and left the faculty and walked around the block a few times to listen to hearsay by the passerbys, and then headed back towards the clothing shop to meet back with the others. Upon arrival, Warpster saw Kick and Shadow, who were lively with excitement. "You won't believe what we found in this place," Shadow said, giddy with joy.
"Enlighten me,"
Warpster responded. Kick tossed Warpster a couple of small computer chips the size of a quarter and said, "Those are books you can upload onto your BT. I bought a couple myself, but I figured you'd need them the most since you like to study a lot."
"Excellent. Did you mark the place you bought them?"
Warpster asked. "Yeah, but I tell you what, those things are expensive. 25,000 bucks a pop for one of those guys." Shadow looked to Warpster and asked, "Hey, Warp, if we're sent to get money, why are we spending this fortune we got somehow?" Warpster patted Shadow on the shoulder and said,
"Because give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. If we give all this money to Spectra, we might not get enough, and then we'll be useless. But if we make ourselves suitable to hunt and get money at a good pace, we'll be making more than what we spent."
Shadow nodded in acknowledgement, and then pointed to Viper inside, who were bearing weapons. "There's an all-welcome armory shop just down south of here, but I warn you, the prices are high for players like us," Viper said as he held up a side-loaded SMG with a sight, grip, and barrel extension called an LRSR. Side held up a brick-looking weapon that he claimed was to be a machine gun. It was known as the S1 Trojan.
"Take us there,"
Warpster said as the whole team began to depart. Anyways, guys, this is Warpster77 signing out. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, leave a like, and let me know what you think in the comments down below. This is Warpster77 signing out.